So this is it. Until the new movie drops later this year, I am completely done with Hunger Games material. I spent a good amount of time with this movie series and I really enjoyed it. Now that we've reached the conclusion, let's get into it because there are still a good amount of things for me to wrap up. We start the movie with Katniss getting her neck brace off. Her injury was a big part of the ending of the last movie and they just rushed past her recovery. She talks funny for 2 lines, then she's fine. Honestly, rushing is the theme of the first 30 minutes of the movie. It feels like the writers want to move to the attack on the Capitol as fast as possible, so multiple scenes get chopped out to make more space for it. Prim goes to see Peeta, and while I know that they sent in one of Peeta's old friends in the book, I get that it was probably easier to stick with someone the audience knew and not take extra time to introduce a new person. She's not the worst character to be excluded from the movies. Peeta starts out calm and slowly begins to unravel, eventually screaming at Prim. Josh Hutcherson does an amazing job, letting us see into the mind of a deeply corrupted man. He really brings his best performance out of all of the movies here, and maybe the reason I feel that way is because there's more focus on him, but I really do feel like this is him at his best. Katniss gets on a plane to go to District 2, and Gale comes up to her to talk about Peeta. Gale really ramps up the douche factor in this one. Every interaction with him and Katniss ends with either them kissing and the viewer thinking, wow, I really don't like Gale, or them looking at each other with an uncomfortable pregnant silence hanging in the air, and the viewer thinking, wow, I really don't like Gale. He can tell that Katniss is feeling sad and decides to imply that he hopes Peeta doesn't get better so he can have Katniss to himself. Time and place, man. Time and place. Honestly, I think this comes down to writing. A lot of times in love triangles, when the story starts to come to the end, one of the options will be made into the worst possible version of themselves.
From the beginning, it was Nessie who wanted me there.
Nessie? You nicknamed my daughter after the Loch Ness Monster?
Leave me alone!
I like to call this trope, don't choose him characterization. This is an easy yet somewhat lazy way to make the character the protagonist ends up with seem better by comparison. Gale continues his don't choose him characterization by advocating for war crimes both on the plane and in a meeting once they land. The meeting is pretty good when you take the whole movie into account. Commander Paler isn't the leader of the rebellion, but she controls the flow of the meeting and won't be talked over. Because of this scene, a few others scattered throughout the movie, in the hospital section of the last movie, when Plutarch says that she'll be president later on, the fact that they were setting this up instantly clicks even though I didn't see it at the time. Gale has a plan to attack the last base in District 2 by causing an avalanche. Once the attack begins, Gale justifies his plans to Katniss by saying they support the Capitol. I like to think that this is a parallel with Snow, having him attack a place full of innocents associating with his enemy, and showing how the Capitol and District 13 aren't that different, and that type of thinking is infecting Gale, because if it isn't, I really don't like this. I'm gonna give the benefit of the doubt to the movie and go with the first option. After the attack, Katniss goes down to the base to shoot a Propo, and a bunch of refugees come out. Katniss tries to save one of them and gets held at gunpoint. She reasons with him in a pretty smart way, then she gets shot. The scene is unintentionally hilarious. It seems like Katniss is going to change the hearts of all the refugees around her, just for some random guy to shoot her. The shooting lands her in the hospital with Joanna as her roommate. Remember how I said the first 30 minutes are rushed? Joanna suffers the most from these changes, with most of what makes her likable being cut. When Joanna steals Katniss's medicine, you can piece together that she has a problem, but in the book, Suzanne Collins takes time to develop how she falls into an addiction after being rescued. Katniss and Joanna end up staying together as roommates when they move out, and Katniss becomes responsible to help her deal with her addiction. In the movie, we get none of that, and Joanna gets sidelined completely. I get the feeling that this wasn't their intention at first, given that they had her head shaved and probably planned out a scene of her explaining that her hair was fried off when they would torture her by pouring water on her and electrocuting her. Katniss goes to see Peeta, and because we're still rushing, they talk to each other in a really tense manner for a few minutes, and then we're done with Peeta's arc in District 13. In the book, Peeta spends a lot more time going into how he was treated in the Capitol and why Joanna is afraid of water. Instead, Emporia is still never mentioned, and I didn't fault the last movie for not including that because I thought they had more to give us here, but instead they wanted to focus on the Capitol, so they decided to cut that storyline. Katniss decides to kill Snow to avenge the man Peeta was, and I really like that. Peeta was her rock, and Snow taking that away, then making it seem like she had him back just to use him as a weapon and turn him into a hollow shell of himself, makes sense as a tipping point. Katniss just can't stand living in a world with Snow in it anymore. Annie and Finnick get married, and as Katniss watches them dance, Joanna comes up to her and tells her a supply plane is leaving for the Capitol. This shot looks so funny to me that I was completely taken out of the movie. Tell me these two shots don't look near identical. Katniss sneaks onto the plane, and this was the exact moment I realized just how much had been cut. In the book, Katniss gets sent to train with the army and has a final test, being told not to shoot a target that she had in her sight and let another person hit the target. She realizes that this is her final test and follows her orders, and in doing so is granted permission to go to the capital. This shows her that she needs to stop being so hot-headed and listen to the people around her, that making it up as you go doesn't always work, and even though she can do something, it doesn't mean she has to do that thing. This would have been a great character moment for her, and given how she has done reckless things the last 2 times she went out into the field, it would make sense for her to get some formal training before they let her put her life on the line.
Adolescent, it's insubordination.
We're on the first hovercraft back.
That'd be ridiculous. She can't come back now.
Katniss lands in the capital, and despite her attempts to keep a low profile, she immediately gets recognized by everyone around her. To add insult to injury, she also got caught on camera, and Coin and Plutarch also saw her. So much for stealth, I guess. Katniss joins Gale's squad. It gets revealed that Snow had pods set out in the streets of the capital and made the people of the capital come into the center of the city, making it extremely hard to get through the city if the rebellion didn't have planes that could drop bombs and take out a lot of people in one fell swoop. It's a good thing they don't have those, right? Multiple days pass between the rebellion landing in the capital and them actually taking over, with tons of rebels undoubtedly dying for literally no reason. The book remedies this by having the peacekeepers slowly pull back, losing block after block, until finally being backed up to Snow's mansion. I get that this whole thing is a why didn't the Eagles fly them to Mordor type of question, but it still feels off. I guess you could excuse this by saying that they did the same thing in the movies and that these people who are evacuating to the mansion are all that's left, and Snow only said to evacuate the outskirts, but this simply can't be all that's left of the capital's population. The capital is way too big for that. That's enough ending talk for right now though, because we got a lot more to cover before we get there. And Katniss gets a briefing for her mission and meets her team, who will not have much significance. Everyone who we haven't met ends up dying pretty fast, and because of that, we don't get enough time to get really attached to them. To give an example, when the Leg twins died, I was surprised, but if I hadn't read the book, I wouldn't care about them nearly as much. Boggs tells the crew that they'll stay away from the action and just shoot propos, which if they're gonna do that, why have so many good soldiers tag along? They're gonna follow days behind the frontline soldiers, so they don't really need bodyguards. It also seems weird that Katniss has to take out Travis despite the rebellion having already gone through, but whatever. Boggs shows a device called a holo, which will scan the streets for all the pods the rebellion knows about. How do they know? Do they have a scanner? If they do, why don't they keep scanning instead of saying these are the only pods we know about? If they have a spy, why doesn't the spy keep informing them? If it was a spy, it wouldn't be a crazy assumption to say that they're probably involved in the placing of the pods, and could just keep updating the map, given how the map seems to function like Google Earth. Back to the briefing, Finnick sees the pods and says welcome to the 76th Hunger Games. When Katniss says this in the book, it's a grim realization that shows Katniss she's basically going back into the arena again, but she's still in District 13 and has to hide her fear so she can get a shot at Snow. Here, it feels more like a nod to the audience, and while the grimness of the statement is there, the impact just isn't. They've already arrived, the only way is forward. It's interesting that Coin let Finnick go to the capital in the first place, especially given how he could be a pretty powerful ally. Later on, Boggs tells Katniss that her death could be the only thing that would help her because Katniss has given her so much pushback, but Finnick has never shown any level of animosity towards Coin or given her a reason to worry. The reason Boggs tells Katniss about Coin's thoughts towards her is Peeta being dropped off and added to their team. This is apparently meant to show us that Coin wants to kill Katniss using Peeta, which makes zero sense for Coin to do when she has dozens of loyal soldiers willing to do literally anything for her, and they are able to control themselves and strike at the exact right time. I know that this is a flaw present in the book too, and while I get that Suzanne wanted to have Katniss and Peeta together, she could have just had Peeta be assigned to come along with them at the beginning, and once Peeta's there, she can send in her assassin. I did like how Katniss is instantly ready to shoot Peeta as soon as she realizes who it is. It shows just how far gone she thinks Peeta is, and how she's ready to end the horrible person he's become.
Give me a watch.
And if it really came down to it, you think you could shoot him?
I wouldn't be shooting Peeta. Be killing a capital mutt.
Katniss watches Peeta to make sure he doesn't snap, and they have a conversation showing Peeta wants to be better, but he needs help. I like how we see more and more of the real Peeta emerge as the movie goes on. The group continues their trip and Boggs triggers a pod, blowing his legs off. This is where things really start to kick off as black tar pours into the courtyard and the crew has to hide in an abandoned building. On the way, Peeta flips out and tries to kill Katniss, only to get stopped and then kill the person who was restraining him. I think it was Mitchell, but I could not keep up. No one reprimands him other than himself, which is odd. Boggs transferred the hollow over to Katniss, who needs it to get to Snow, so when Boggs' second in command Mitchell asks for it, Katniss says that she can't and guns get pulled. She claims that she's on special orders from Coin, and one of the camera crew backs her story. Keep that in your mind for later. One of the leg twins hurt her leg, so the two decide to hide in the building as the rest of the crew cross the courtyard and hide. Why not take her along? You got her up the stairs. You might as well try to get her as far away as possible and not try to 2v40, which is what their plan was. Once the crew are safe, Caesar Flickerman comes on a news broadcast and announces the death of Katniss's crew. I really like the shift in demeanor. Caesar goes from seeming like a fun uncle to dropping the act and openly celebrating Katniss's death, someone he seemed to really enjoy. The crew ends up going down into the sewers, and they hole up in a hallway for the night. Katniss is on watch and hears a name being hissed from down the hallway. The crew slipped through a hole in the wall way too slow for my liking, and because they took forever, freakish ghoul-like mutts show up and attack Jackson. But Jackson just chose to hang out with the creepy whispers approaching. The mutts chase him into a room with a ladder up into the streets, and Finnick sacrifices himself to save Katniss. Finnick's death is insane both here and in the book, and it reminds the audience that absolutely no one is safe. When the crew gets to their new hideout, Katniss apologizes and says that she lied, which they would obviously know already. Remember how I said to keep Cressida backing up Katniss in your mind? Well, Katniss knows that the camera crew doesn't have any special orders because there are no special orders. Does Katniss think Cressida backed her up instinctively and would just never think about the fact that she doesn't actually have special orders? That's the only way this scene makes even a little sense, and even that explanation doesn't make a ton of sense. Gale and Peeta have a conversation about which one of them Katniss will pick, but because we can't see how Katniss feels about the conversation the same way we do in the book, there isn't really a point of having this here. With all the other stuff that's been cut, I would trade this for Joanna and Katniss becoming friends any day of the week. Katniss gets pretty mad about this conversation in the book and thinks she's being reduced to being cold and calculated, and that they think she's just out for herself. Gale and Katniss leave the hideout to take out Snow, using the cover of refugees to get into the mansion. It's an odd plan given how they're both really famous and they don't even try to put on makeup, but I can buy that the citizens are so scared they're only focused on getting to safety. Peacekeepers are searching people at a checkpoint, so the two turn back only to see other peacekeepers closing in. Katniss is about to be searched, then a missile hits. Some might say that this is super convenient timing, and while it is exactly that, it doesn't take me out of the story enough to be really detrimental. Gale gets captured and screams at Katniss to shoot him, but she doesn't. This is a pretty good decision given that firing an arrow at Gale would draw a ton of unwanted attention, and his scream for it is nothing more than raving from an irrational person scared out of his mind. I find it odd that Gale would be scared at this point, given how the rebellion is clearly about to win the war, so asking for assisted seppuku, even if he is scared, makes very little sense. Children gather around the front of Snow's mansion, and the hovercraft drops packages for them. The packages explode and the medics rush in, one of which being Prim. The packages explode again, killing Prim and burning Katniss. The fact that this whole thing started with Katniss saving Prim, and it ends with her failing to do so again is a great way to bring things full circle. Just when things are about to get better, they get a lot worse. In the book, Katniss points out how odd it is for someone so young to be sent to the front lines, and she's clearly the youngest medic in the scene, but no one points that out. Katniss visits Snow and gets convinced that the bomber who killed Prim came from District 13. Gale comes to tell Katniss that Coin wants to see her, and it gets revealed that he feels responsible for Prim's death and never came to see Katniss because of it. Gale gets blamed for Prim's death a lot, and I don't think that's fair. There was no way he knew that Coin would use his idea on children. As far as he knew, this was a trap for peacekeepers. I do like how Katniss tells him goodbye, being compassionate but firm. She cares about Gale, but she can't abide what she feels he might as well have done himself. Coin proposes a final Hunger Games, this time involving the children of the capital. Katniss agrees, and I think this was just meant to make Coin trust her. Katniss would never willingly put kids in the same position she was in and make everything she fought for useless. Katniss goes out to execute Snow, but chooses to shoot Coin instead, which is the right choice. She had seized power already, killed Prim, and was planning to kill more children. Katniss saved a lot of people by doing what she did. She gets sent back to District 12 and on the way out runs into Effie. I like how much Effie warms up to Haymitch and Katniss throughout the movies, and because of that warming up, this goodbye feels really heartfelt and shows how much the three of them have grown in the past 3 years. When Katniss gets sent back to District 12, she struggles with Prim's death, but the book makes her depression feel a lot more all-encompassing, making her unable to change clothes for weeks as she floats through life, not quite living, yet not quite dying either. Katniss is clearly sad here, but we move past that to get to Peeta's return. Katniss and Peeta realizing how deeply they felt for each other all this time is very sweet, but they could have taken more time for Katniss to process things. The epilogue starts and this is the crowning jewel of the story. Katniss's CGI age up looks pretty good, I just wanted to throw that in. Katniss and Peeta have 2 children, and Peeta plays with the older one while Katniss holds a baby. The baby wakes up from a nightmare and Katniss confronts him, telling him that she gets nightmares too, and they'll never go away, but she has a list of every time she sees someone do good, and that helps her through it. Katniss has found happiness, and even though she has to work for it sometimes, sitting in this field with a loving family makes it all worth it.
Are you coming to the tree?
I really enjoyed making this video series, and I hope you all enjoyed watching. This movie was really fun to watch, but it could have been about 15 minutes longer and the story would improve a fair bit. This was a pretty strong quadrilogy, I think that's the word, and there wasn't a single bad movie. Keeping a somewhat consistent quality in creative works is apparently getting harder, so the writers deserve praise here for pulling it off. The movies cut out a lot, but I think they leave enough in that you can still get enjoyment from it, even if you're the biggest book purist possible. Some people say that The Hunger Games is a critique of capitalism, and others say it's a critique of communism. Personally, I think it's a critique of authoritarianism, and a commentary on how that kind of regime is completely unsustainable. Or maybe it's a critique of the dark qualities of humanity, which is why political opponents see the worst aspects of their opposition's values in the Capitol. When I finished The Hunger Games, my first thoughts were, can this peace last, and will the Capitol be repeated? I was 12 then, and now, almost a decade later, I can say no to the first question and yes to the second. Given human nature, when you look through history, you can see this type of thing happen over and over. Tyrannical governments fall, prosperity occurs, and then the tyranny's effects are forgotten and their practices are repeated in some way. It's almost a sick game in and of itself, causing humanity to have to fight their way out from under over and over. I think the thing that keeps us going is the hope of freedom. Some might say that humanity isn't even worth the effort, but there are much worse games to play.
So do I. Let them have a taste of it.
You guys, this way of thinking